you know, when we look at our ballot, it's really important to go it's called down the ballot, so go all the way down, because in addition to looking at our president, it's really important to also make sure that we're looking at our sheriffs, and we're looking at our mayors, and we're looking at our state representatives to make sure that they're representing our interests, because they will make laws and policies and decisions. And if we want those decisions to reflect our interests, we have to show up and vote.
Mahalo so much. Is there anybody else who would like to respond? All right, and if that's the case, we'll move on to the next question. Thank you so much for talking about how we don't just have to vote, like we need to help out in our communities as well. It's really inspiring to know that there's so much more we can do rather than just voting, because we are underage, so it's not, we can't vote. So it's nice to know that there are other ways we can help. All right, so our next question will be coming from Haley.
Thank you, Noe. My question for the panelists is, why aren't we seeing higher voting numbers from the younger generations? What factors are unique to young people's experiences that make them less likely to participate in elections? If it would be all right, I would like to start with Juan to begin this question.
Haley, thank you for the great question, and thank you to everyone that's tuning in on this conversation, for all the students that really care about our community and that recognize the importance of leadership and of doing everything we can to make a difference in our lives and in the lives of our neighbors and our friends. To answer your question, Haley, you know, I think youth have, I think that we're seeing youth frustrated. I think people are frustrated because, you know, we see these disparities, we see inequities, we see things that are clearly not fair in our society, in our government, in our criminal justice system, in the way that we protect our environment. And I think people are frustrated, you know. We've been asking our leaders, you know, to prioritize these things, but for so long, you know, people make excuses, and leaders from the past have made excuses, and I think that a lot of the situations that we have now are a result of that. And I would say that, you know, it's so important for young people to be involved, because young people, even when you cannot vote yet, and I think you can look at the Sunrise Movement and young leaders across the country really speaking to issues on the basis of principles and values and outcomes, and about seeing the world the way it's supposed to be. Because sometimes grown-ups, and especially grown-ups in power, you know, they're motivated by the wrong things, and about maintaining the status quo, and, you know, about protecting people that are already wealthy and already have access to the services and programs that have them. And when, you know, young people and new voters vote because they want to see something and it doesn't happen because the system doesn't want to change, we can't let that discourage us. We know that when we do vote, especially locally, we see that change happen, because all change is local, and local leaders, local government, this is where it all happens.
I'd like to add one thing to what Juan Carlos said. It's not just about voting, it's about using your voice. So if you are under 18 and you can't vote and you feel like you can't vote, you do have a voice. You can write a letter, you can call and testify. So there are school boards, and there are legislative sessions, and there are city council meetings, and your voice should be seen and heard there. So if you feel like you can't participate or be involved, I would encourage you to think differently, because you can. There are ways for us to be engaged and to be involved. So don't let that discourage you. And if you and know that you may get discouraged and you may get discouraged over and over again. And I've been discouraged over and over again. And I just have to keep going, because if I don't keep going, then I don't know if I can let my kids live in what we have today. And the only way that I can work towards that is to continue to use my voice and continue to use my voice. And it might be frustrating, and it's okay to take a day off to say, like, I need rest, but then wake up the next day and say, what are we going to do tomorrow?
I'm going to add to that also. I think also the reason why there's not a lot of young voters is because systemically it's not encouraged. There's a huge systemic thing of how we recruit people, how we encourage people, how we set up things for people to vote. It's not set up to encourage younger generations to vote. Most of the people who are voting are 65 years and older. They have time to vote. They know how to vote. All the advertisement, all the information, everything is centered to get these people who are already voting to continue to vote, and all the information that is put out is put in a way that these people, or specific generation, can understand and targeted specifically to them to vote. There isn't a big push to teach younger people how to vote, to bring in younger people, to even the get out vote movement is not as strong, and that's systemically done to kind of suppress the younger voter, because we'll talk about it more later, but we have a great voice, it's just not encouraged. And so that is why there's a lower turnout for younger people also.
Yeah, thanks for uplifting that. I was going to say, reflecting back onto my high school experience, I don't ever remember being taught how to vote or that local elections mattered. And so I had to do my own research, and a lot of the language in a voter pamphlet statement is not youth friendly. It doesn't talk about how it'll impact the youth, or what conversations the youth should be having. And so I'm so grateful that you folks are creating this space, and this is youth led. I think this is so innovative, and not a lot of people are doing this type of stuff. So kudos to you folks and Auntie Lei for putting this together, because it starts with these conversations like this.
Thank you for answering my questions. Yeah, a lot of my friends are very adamant about voting, and they really want to know what's going on in politics, but I know that some people aren't voting. So thank you for answering my question.
Great. Mahalo for all of your answers. Our next question will be coming from Mema.
This one could be answered by Marv, if that's okay. The question I have is, why is it that voting season causes different feelings of urge, anxiety, excitement, or even concern for the public?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's just there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of unknowns, and because of uncertainties with vote by mail, or if their vote is counted, or not really having access to information about how the voting process happens, it can cause a lot of emotions to come up, because for a lot of people, it's their livelihood. It impacts working families. It impacts low-income BIPOC communities. So whoever is in office next very much could flip our world upside down, and we've seen that.
I'll also add to that. I think human nature is people don't like change. You like what's comfortable. You like what's, what you can expect. And so whenever there's an election, there's always a chance that things are going to change for you. So that gives a lot of families anxiety of it's the unknown of what's going to happen. Also, everybody wants to win. You want to be on the winning team. So whether you're in power, your political group is in power, you want to continue to keep that power. If you're, going against an incumbent, then that person wants to win. So there's a lot of strong emotions with regarding of change, with wanting to win, that just brings up all those human reactions of trying to stay safe and stay ahead, I guess, and that's what triggers a lot of emotions during those times.
I also want to add that politics is really value-based, right? So when we have an election coming up, a lot of our values come up when we have conversations and hold space for other people. And I know growing up in Hawaii, my family was very much not a talk about politics a lot. And when you start to have those conversations, it brings up a lot of like value questions for other people and their lived experiences. And sometimes that can be hard for people to share, especially if they're still navigating navigating those feelings.
And I can add, I think that there's, you know, if we talk about Beaverton specifically, the Beaverton School District is a district with 36% of our families that are in free and reduced lunch. And that was last year. And so if we imagine the impact of what an election could do for those families or not those families, given what's happening with COVID, given what's happening around a lot of really big issues that we're learning, like, of course there's anxiety, because we know that given what's going on right now, that 36% is not an accurate percent. It's probably significantly more. And so if we confront that, then we acknowledge that there are people who don't know where food is coming from, and they don't know whether they'll have a home above their heads. And so the people that we elect across all levels have the ability to impact what that looks like. And so sometimes I think there are literally people's lives depending on some of the decisions that we make in our elections. And that is very anxiety ridden.
Yeah, I can understand, because I bet for all the families, they want the best for their, especially if you have kids, you want the best for their future. And I can understand it, Auntie Nadia, that you want to be able to choose a leader where your kids or your family members will still have a roof over their heads. And going back to Auntie Tia, I understand that there is a lot of people who are competitive, and you want to win, and of course if you don't win it's kind of frustrating, but also I can see visually, like, there's a lot of people who are having like posters outside, there's flags, or there's, especially social media when posting, and I can see, because you want to choose the best leader that will affect your future through the right pathway. And so I understand. So thank you for you sharing that with me.
Our next question will be coming from Kina.
Thank you, Noelani. What would happen to our society if there were no voters? For example, how would we confirm our future leader? And how would it affect the growth of our youth and families? Nadia can answer this question first, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I will tell you a little bit about myself. My dad is originally from India and my mom is originally from Pakistan. And when you come from communities that aren't necessarily originally from here, anyways, in our culture, so in India and in Pakistan, while voting exists, communities are what makes things happen. And so when I first saw this question, I was like, I'm totally okay with no voters, because there are a lot of societies and communities who have come together and said, we are going to, this is going to be our leader. And I think similar in your culture and my culture, there's a huge respect for elders. And so, communities look to elders to be their leaders. And so sometimes I think, I don't think that it would be bad if there were no voters, but I imagine how so many communities, when I think of my dad and my mom and where they come from and how we're able to say, let's all actually sit together and talk about it. And so I actually think that we could really reimagine like what our leaders look like and work together. And what we're learning, especially with COVID, is that communities are showing up for each other. And if communities are going to show up for each other in this time of crisis, then we can also show up for each other in regular times. And so I don't know if this is going to be the popular answer, but I think it would be okay if there were no voters, because I think people from different backgrounds and different cultures have traditionally found ways to come to consensus without really what I would call formalized systems that exist here specifically.
I think that's a really great answer, Nadia. And, the way that you focus on consensus-based community decision-making is definitely a value that I think in, this generation that I feel like we're losing. And, I think that when we're working in organizations or in our work, in our teams, and even sometimes in school as students, when we're in groups, we try and lead by consensus, right? We get people's opinions and then we try and make that best decision. I think that our democracy, in which we have so many, obviously hundreds of millions of people that live in the United States, this system, although imperfect, has allowed us to also find ways to find representation. And I think Tia mentioned earlier as well that voting and the voting system hasn't always been perfect for everyone, but that doesn't mean that we're not working every single day to make it better.
I think with Nadia's perspective also, it's a different type of voting. You're still getting consensus. You're still, community building and hearing the collective voices, which is what the purpose of voting in the United States or any democracy right now is to try to get a consensus of the community and the group. So luck for India or Pakistan, which I don't know very much about their whole community census building, but I imagine it works well in a perfect world, but it's also another form of some kind of voting. I think what's important with being able to vote, and if we were not able to have any votes, you wouldn't be able to keep people accountable. People in power would just continue to stay in power and they would do their own agendas. And there's no, being able to vote gives you, gives the community a way to mirror their leadership as far as they can into what their value system is and their priorities. Without that, there is no accountability for whoever is leading. Somebody could just come in guns a-blazing and take over, and if we were not able to have a voice or a say, there's nothing to let that person, one, take that person out of power, or two, even to guide them on which direction the country, the community, the city needs to go. So that's why I think voting is still very important, whether it's imperfect or not. We need to continue to make it as perfect as we can, because it is just, in the end, it's a collective of voices. And so that's why even more so it's more important that we get everybody's vote counted, because we need the whole collection of voices, not just some targeted group.
Thank you for answering that question. I really see both sides now, and that was a question that's been on my mind for a while. So it's interesting to imagine a world with no voters and a world where they're like our voters, but it's like all perfect.
And don't get me wrong, like, we have voters, and despite having an imperfect voting system, we should still absolutely vote in this country.
Thank you.
All right, so our next question will be coming from Chloe.
All right, so my question for you all is, how does the two-party system affect political climate? And if it's okay, we can start with Juan.
Thank you, Chloe. So since lockdown, I have been watching Alexander Hamilton, or just Hamilton, like nonstop. And I'm not sure if y'all have seen it too, but I just really love the play, and I love watching it. I love singing the songs. And I think that there's a lot of things that we can learn about how our democracy was set up, and how a lot of people had ideological battles about what a system should be, and it's a reminder that our system is an experiment, and it's an experiment that we all have to show up every day. You know, and kind of going back to Hamilton as well, because I just think it's such a great, you know, point that we can connect on, is, you know, the party system has, you know, I think created a lot of partisanship and both sides ism in a way that, you know, especially in the 21st century with technology and social media, I think that unfortunately we are kind of getting farther and farther apart. And I think the kind of leadership that we need right now in our country is leaders that can kind of bring us back together around the values of what we want to see in the future for our country, for our state, for our county, for our city. But, you know, in general, our two-party system has evolved a lot over time. But, you know, George Washington did warn us from, you know, becoming too partisan and becoming too, you know, combative against each other when, you know, we're all here to make this the best place that we can make it. Those are my thoughts.
Anybody else, or well, does anybody else have anything they would like to add?
I'll add that the two-party system makes it harder for people outside of those parties to get elected. And so when you almost have to fit in a box, either one or the other, to win something, because most people are either here or most people are either there. If you have somebody who's thinking outside of the box, who is a little bit of in here and a little bit in here, but don't quite fit to one side, the likelihood of that person, because of our two-party system, getting elected or getting support, because to win, and especially in our politics right now, you can't just be a great leader, you also have to be a great campaigner, and that's the hard part of our system. So you can have great leaders who are not great campaigners, and they will never get into that position of power. You can have people who are terrible leaders but great campaigners, but they made that first step, and then you get not great elected people, but, you know, they were shadowed and portrayed in a certain effect where they were able to win. So to get elected, most of the time you have to fit in one box or the other, and so that in itself is hurtful, I think, to our political system, in that we are also put into two boxes, which creates partisan, right? You usually have to pick a team to win, and so I would say that although it is helpful in making sure that we have somebody represented in one group and another, we don't have enough representations as far as outside of those two boxes, and that's the limit of our two-party system.
Great points, Tia. Spot on. Tell the truth.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think the two-party system creates like a huge divisiveness between people. And like Auntie Tia said before, everybody wants to be on this winning team. They want to get their way all the time, and it becomes like this battle of values almost. And it's interesting that you brought up Hamilton, because that's kind of like where the political party's idea kind of started, but then it turned into like this huge crazy thing. And it's become less about like what's best for everybody, and now like what's best for me and my team and people that are like me and think the same as me. So, and I think Noelani had a follow-up question for you guys too.
Yes, so my follow-up question is about how I watched the vice presidential debate the other night, and at the very end, there was a question that was written by this 8th grade girl from Ohio, I believe. And she asked about why is it expected that we are to look up to this two-party system that's constantly fighting, one trying to get ahead of the other, and why is it found so difficult for people to work together? And I understand that people have different opinions and there are downsides to both parties, but there are things that we could work together on, and I find it odd that we don't try to make the best out of both parties and everyone's separate individual opinions. So why do you think it's so difficult that in our country we have such like underlying opinions and people's voices aren't always heard?
I can give that one a shot. I mean, it's a really big question though. You know, I don't use this term lightly, but when we talk about like how white supremacy exists, it's this idea that we've built a system and we've made sure that that system is as complicated as possible for very specific people to have access. And so it's like, and the more layers that we attach to it, the harder it is for you and other people to like get through it. And so, you know, a lot of my civic engagement started when I advocated for my kids in their schools. And I started learning like, oh, I can advocate this way and I can advocate this way. And then oh my God, I didn't know that I could do this. And so, you know, as just a regular person trying to just really make sure that my kids are getting the best educational experience, I'm learning all of these layers. And so to take it back to your question, like sometimes I really think, you know, that like we've built this really complex, complicated system and made sure that as we did it, that we're leaving as many people out. And so this is like a very big theoretical answer to your question, but I really sometimes like I learn different things and the way we do things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's just rigged so that if you don't have, you know, a ton of interest and a ton of time and a ton of capacity, you won't be informed. And that's kind of my big picture thought, I guess.
I will say right now in the political climate, and especially as we were talking about the two-party system, it's kind of the culture that's kind of happened right now and how partisan it's gotten. And it's caught because of that two-party system, people feel like they have to be here or here, and they can only think like here and only think like there, and there's nothing that's meeting in the middle. And so like if you look at our senators or whatnot, when they're voting, there's a lot of background, like people don't just vote based on their conscience. There's a lot of negotiations and you have to vote by your party. And if you go against that, what your party is saying, then you're kicked out of the party. So until we can have real conversations and make sure that our electeds are accountable to the people that elected them, rather than just throwing them in a box with other people who are in the same box and having them all think the same, there's going to continue to be that kind of partisan and fighting. And I also think it's kind of a balance, right? Like we're way over here sometimes, so then you need people way over here other times to fight for it. And then eventually you kind of meet back in the middle, right? So even though it seems like, you know, 4 years or whatnot, or is a long time, it's actually not. It's kind of, there's always a rebalancing, which is, I guess, a good thing about having a two political party also, because there's always, because we're voting, we're always kind of going back and forth, and we can't go too much one way because then it energizes the other side to bring it back to, and then hopefully, even though right now we're swayed one way, you know, at some time or the other, we're always eventually working our way to the middle. It's just kind of the political climate right now is just like that.
I also want to add that like Oregon is ranked like at the very bottom of campaign finance laws. And so we really need to have fair and honest elections. Otherwise, you have a lot of corporations and a lot of special interest groups investing hundreds and thousands of dollars into these candidates where they are no longer really held by the values that they're running for, but more so by the values of the people who helped them purchase that seat, right? So you'll see them go further and further where they need to be as they get more investments from special interest groups and corporations, which ultimately is not for what the community wants to see in an elected official. So I'm very excited that campaign finance limits will be on the ballot measure, or on the ballots this election period, because we absolutely need to change that to lower that playing field so that we are able to choose leaders based off of having it being accessible, especially as we want more BIPOC representation in the legislature or in other elected positions.
And then just to break that down a little, you know, campaign finance is the idea of like how much money you can raise. So the more money you can raise, the higher the chances for you to win. And so something that I've been learning very recently is this idea that like that money is really buying the election. And so when we think of who traditionally has money and who traditionally doesn't have money, and that we're electing the people that have the money that are already so far removed from the community. And so really looking at how we're doing campaign finance to ensure that everyone is able to get access. And so if any of you lovely young people wanted to run someday, we would love for you to do that. You need to start thinking about how you might raise a certain amount of money. And we're talking, I'm not talking like $50, like we're talking $20, $30, $40, $50,000 to run a campaign. And so when we think of campaign finance, we have to think that, you know, all those names you see on the ballot, they've got some money behind them. And if you want to do your research, there's it's called Oristar, the Oregon Secretary of State website, and you can go to campaign finance reporting and you can actually look up who is donating to MAR, who is donating to these people, and are their interests aligned with mine? And that can be really helpful as well. So just breaking down kind of that campaign finance piece is you need a lot of money, or you need to be able to raise a lot of money to run for office. And even when you get into that office, I'll tell you, they're not paying you much either. So there's a lot of layers of already being able to be in a financially comfortable place that you can serve and somehow still pay your bills, which you can't. Like, you have to usually work in addition to, depending on the office that you hold.
Great. Thank you so much for answering my question. I definitely better understand the different layers behind the work that's put into campaigning and just the political climate and the whole two-party system, and that it's not all bad, and that we are trying to find a balance, I guess. I've just never seen it before, but I am now more open-minded. All right, so our next question will be coming from Kahoku.
I would like to start off this question by asking Tia, what is the definition of a leader who will guide our future to equality, unity, and trust?
Thank you. This is like the funnest question. So I actually Googled it because, I mean, I know what I think it is, but I wanted to see what Google said. And I Googled great leader. But the first thing that popped up was, it says, here, let me look at it. A great leader possesses a clear vision, is courageous, has integrity, honesty, humility, and a clear focus. Great leaders help people reach their goals, are not afraid to hire people that might be better than them, and take pride in the accomplishments of those that they help along the way, which is a very succinct and amazing explanation on what a great leader is. I will say, though, it is missing one thing, which is, and I think is one of the most important things that a leader can do, which is creating a culture. And so that's creating the expectations that the company, the business, the political group, or whatever, that needs to be met regarding, it's not just about goals and results, it's about creating a social value, a way of behaviors that work environment or election or whatever is done in. So I think a great leader, you have to have great communication skills, because you're going to be conversing with people of all different levels and places and social skills, etc. So having great integrity is something that is especially important, because you want to make sure your leader is doing the right thing and advocating for everybody, especially the underdog in your group. And then you'll never be the smartest, right? A leader is not necessarily the smartest person. There'll always be somebody smarter than you. You can't know everything about everything, but I think the purpose of a leader is to find the people who will make the company or the goal or the thing, to bring those people together to make whatever goal it is and move it forward. So I think that's one of the most important lessons of a leader, is to just be able to realize that you're a leader who brings people together. You're not necessarily a leader of what you're doing per se. I will say that when I say that leaders need to find people who are knowledgeable with wisdom, it's not necessarily just skill set. It's a whole person thing. You have to be able to find people who understands, you know, or just be a complete human being. Like, I can teach, skills is very teachable, but teaching social skills such as empathy, perseverance, integrity, those things are very much harder. And some people focus so much on skills, they don't look at the whole person. And so I think being an effective leader is recognizing that you need to hire whole people, not just certain skill sets. And then you have to be a life learner. You have to know that you're not always, you're not going to know everything, like I talked about, and you have to be flexible. So you have to know that, like our current climate or whatnot, things are always changing. So you need to be supportive, and you need to move and flow and even flow with everything that's going on within your group. So I think a leader is kind of like a parent. You're constantly growing, you're constantly changing, you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing, learning, and changing other people and moving everybody forward. And if somebody is not working or somebody is failing in the family, that's not just a, well, let's cut you out. It's a, how do we uplift you? Because if you're not working well, then that affects the whole family or the whole dynamic. And so as a parent, it's just finding everybody's strength and bringing it together, and really just moving everybody forward as a group.
That's a really great list. And I want to echo everything that you said and add active listening. I think it's important for a leader to be able to listen to their constituents and hear what's important to the community, so that can be reflected in their decision-making process. And I also think in a leader, for me, I want a disruptor. I want someone who's going to disrupt the social norms, especially, with COVID hitting us, we see so much reimagination in how school systems are and how we connect with other folks. And so I want a bold leader who's okay to explore what those changes can look like. And if it doesn't work, I hope my leader has accountability to say, hey, maybe that wasn't the greatest idea. Let's go back to the drawing board, have another session with community for that feedback and try it again, because leadership is not scarce. I think a great leader sees leaders in the community that they're serving and utilizes all of that to create one voice and move in one general direction.
I would add one thing as well, which is active list. So to like Tia and Var, and one thing of active listening is that empathy. And I want to really emphasize empathy. I think a big thing that's missing right now is our ability to empathize for different groups of people. And so my lived experiences may be one way and someone else's lived experiences may be another, but my ability to actively listen to their experience and empathize with them, so that when I am making a choice about something, I am remembering what I heard, but also empathizing with the need of that person specifically.
All amazing answers, and I just want to reinforce everything that these amazing leaders just said. I have nothing to add. They covered it.
Thank you, and I completely agree with you. You want a leader that can do all the things that you basically listed and more, trusting. You want to be able to look up to the leader. You want to when there's a time of uncertainty, a crisis, you want to be able to look to them to see what they can do and help. So yes, thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Our next question will be coming from Sophia.
Thank you all for being here. My question is, how can the voting system improve to help reflect American citizens? For example, ranked voting. And could this question go to you first, Mar?
Absolutely. I love this question. Yes, ranked choice voting definitely would definitely improve our voting system. Oregon is also working on giving voting rights back to incarcerated folks. We can't remove them from that democracy practice. Like, a lot of folks who are incarcerated will end up going back out into society. And in Oregon is also a state that allows felons to vote. And when we think about who's affected by incarceration, it's our Black and Brown communities. And so we silence them and we take away their rights to, have policies that will reflect and help them or remove white supremacy from these systems by taking away their option to vote. I think something else that would help us is postmarked ballots. Here in Oregon, if you don't get your ballot in the mail by October 27th, then it's safer to drop it off at a ballot drop-off box location. And I think the last thing to think about, especially as a lot of folks move to vote by mail, is accessibility needs, right? As folks are filling out their ballots at home, we need to have language justice where folks who don't read and write English have access to looking at their voter pamphlet statement and understanding the language that's in there. A lot of that language, like we mentioned earlier, is so political and doesn't translate very well to a lot of different languages. We have to think about folks who might need help with any other accessibility needs that they might have. How do we help folks who miss putting it in a mailbox? How do we help them get it dropped off to a ballot drop-off location? And so that's where a lot of community-based organizations like Apano try to bridge those gaps, when truly it should be a state effort. This community-based organizations shouldn't always have to bridge that gap. There's definitely people that we miss by doing that. But I'm excited because I think we are going in the right direction.
I also think that improving the way that we vote is super important, and making sure that in whatever system that we continue to adapt to and change to, that we get participation as high as possible. But it also makes me think that there's another side of voting that yeah, we vote in elections in May, in November, maybe sometimes other times if there's special elections. But I also think that it's really important for our local governments to do things differently when we talk about our budgets. And right now there's a huge trend, an innovative trend that's called participatory budgeting, which basically makes the budget allocation process like voting, where you can come together, not just vote for the person or for the issue, but if it's with your city and how do we want to spend money to improve this park, and then the community decides on that together. I think we need to be doing a lot more of that. I think that we have the technology. I think that we have, the energy and the willingness to create systems like ranked choice voting, to do participatory budgeting, because in a lot of ways, and I think that we talked about this a little bit earlier, people feel disconnected from their leaders. Their leaders aren't accountable. Their leaders aren't listening. People are frustrated. Maybe that's why our participation rate isn't the highest. And so we need to do everything that we can to make sure that people feel involved, included, and that when people are ready to be leaders, they want to be leaders, that they can do that.
Thank you. I totally agree that, we all come from different perspectives, cultures, traditions, even the neighborhood we're from can affect all these, how many votes we get in or anything like that. So yeah, I totally agree that we need to change that gap and build that bridge. Thank you.
Our next question will be coming from Chloe.
All right, so going off of the topic of voting systems, my second question will be directed at Nadia at first. What are the pros and cons of having an electoral college?
A great question. And like Tia on the last one, I had to Google this one as well just to make sure I could do my research. And so Google is a very powerful tool. I think one of the pros that I found that actually really resonated with me was this idea of getting like equitable numbers across populations. So like if we made it a popular vote, then we might not get state representation from all of our states. So there's this idea that like the electoral college decides based on the population, the number of votes. And so that kind of allows it to be like a kind of a level playing field. I'd say that's a bit of a pro. I think a con is that, and we've seen this, is that, the popular vote doesn't always kind of make it out there. And so, I think we have opportunities. We've talked a lot about reimagining education and like reimagining things. Like we also have an opportunity to reimagine what our electoral college system looks like in the future. And while there might be flaws with this system, it only really does the president, and not only, but the president and the vice president are the main people that are impacted by this. There are, at the state level and the city level where we can have a little bit more flexibility. And so I think we've got some opportunity, and we need to continue to have discussions about how we can make sure that our systems allow everyone to participate.
Yeah, that was a really good technical question, and I want to chime in too. I studied government in college, and so I love talking about stuff like this. And I think the Electoral College, when it was first installed, was to help with representation with states and how they engaged in national conversations and how states had their people reflected. I think we have to look back at when the Electoral College was installed, in which we were much more agriculture based. Our economies were very different. We didn't have as big of cities or the suburbs like we do now. We didn't have the transportation system or the technology that we have now. And, I think that the Electoral College is definitely broken. The initial values that the founding fathers had was to try and distribute power evenly among more rural areas and cities. And I think what we see now is that our demographics and our populations have changed so much that a state like California, which has 38 million people, has the same amount of power in one way as maybe a state with 900,000 people, and those things play out differently in the Senate and obviously in the House of Representatives, where votes play out that way. But if we look at the last few elections, what we've seen is the popular vote, which is like everyone voting for one thing versus the other thing, whereas the Electoral College kind of breaks it up into proportions and gives some states that might not have as much people more power and more weight, and that's unfair. I think that's unfair.
Anybody else would like to add? All right. Yeah, I thank you for your answers. Totally agree that like the way things were before when the country's original laws were made, like the foundation is all there for good systems, but a lot has changed since then. And it's a different world now, obviously, so things need to change along with it. And what you said, Nadia, about how like locally like we can change things, and really things like voting, it changes by state. So if you want to change something like the system, if the voting system, it needs to come from electing officials in your own state or your own area. So thank you.
Mahalo for your question, Chloe. The next question will be coming from Mayma.
Hi, so another question I have is, in what ways is the social media both helpful and harmful during election season? It would be nice if we started the question off with Tia.
So this is it's I want to say there's more cons than pros, but there's still some pros. So, okay, let's start with pros. I think access to information now is amazing, right? So before, you had what? Newspaper, you had the news. If you didn't get the newspaper, if you missed the news, there was no way to get that information, right? There was no way really to relook up stuff or anything like that. Now that we have social media, now that we have cable, we have TV that records stuff, we can go back and watch shows. You have no reason to not have information. You have Google, you have everything. So all of that stuff brings you knowledge and gives it to you at the tips of your finger at whatever time is convenient for you, which is an amazing advantage. I think also that for whoever's running, it creates a great political platform where you're able to reach out to a larger audience, so you can tell your story to a lot more people. And then also, I think the fact that you can engage on social media, or you can post your own opinions, you can read your friends' opinions, you can tweet the president. Like, the fact that things are connected more closely, it makes you feel like you're more empowered, it makes you feel more involved, and being that you're more involved and more invested, hopefully that encourages you to have an opinion and participate in the discussion. The problem with social media and media in itself is that the things that you read, the things that you see, everything is done in bias, and it's done by some network or some group that wants you to feel a specific way, wants to show you as something specific, wants to push their own agenda on you. So anything you read, any data that you see, even pictures that you see that causes some kind of emotion, they're put there to make you feel something that somebody else wants you to feel, that some other group wants you to do. So that's probably the hardest part of media right now, is that there is no real thing. There's stuff that are close, but most of the time everything is biased and put in some way. The other thing is, like, things that are covered now are specifically picked to be, that information is given. You're not able to see things that are not covered. So if somebody doesn't write something you know nothing about, right? So if a media decides not to post some sort of issue and nobody picks up on it, you won't see that. So that transparency of knowing as much as you can about a candidate or as much as you can about current events is not always there, because it's just pushed on what people think is going to be popular and bring viewership, etc. I'll also say, especially with social media like Facebook or whatnot, there's a thing called like an echo chamber. So all of those stuff is you start to see stuff, and the algorithms and the robots or whatever, all the juggernauts behind social media, they start to feed you what you want to see. So you're only seeing what you want to see. You're only being friends with people who think the same, and that starts to just, there is no cross-aisle dialogue, because you're only seeing things that the computer says that you should be seeing, because that's what's popular for you. And so you're not really seeing the other side, and you're not conversing with people on the other side, because lots of times you're like, okay, well, I can't talk to you anymore because you think this, and that's just out of not in the value system that you have. So you're able to cut off those things and not look at those things. So I will say with as you know, as you guys start to vote and as you guys go forward, and I have great faith in you, because I think for the older generation and my generation, all the internet stuff is new, and trying to learn how to filter all of that stuff is new, and things are constantly changing, but you guys are growing up with the system. So it's you're empowered to know that you need to search for your own data. You need to know that whatever you're seeing is specifically set up to push you in a direction. So be aware of trying to kind of get to the evidence of the facts. Don't just believe whatever data is given to you. Really look at the information behind the data, and was it presented to skew it one way rather than just this is the data. And really take time to do your own research on reputable websites. That's the other thing about social media. Anybody can post anything. Robots can come in that are fake and just try to constantly send stuff your way, but and things that are not fake, conspiracy theories and stuff, they can go viral, and there's no fact checking or anything like that. So I think it's important for especially young voters and people, even and older people now, to really understand that there's this huge juggernaut behind it that is not fully transparent, that is not evidence-based, that is not set to just give you the information. It's set to always skew you some way.
I can add a little lesson on media, right? So you think like what's media, like TV, newspaper, social media, right? So how do these organizations make revenue or make money? And I'm sharing this because I worked in advertising. And so it's advertising. So, newspapers could not do what they did, like the dollar subscription or whatever, magazine or whatever you're getting. The only way these organizations can make money is through advertising dollars. And to get advertising dollars, you got to sell yourself a little bit, and you might not necessarily have the objectivity that you need for news. And so when media becomes something that you can buy and sell and not really informative, then this is kind of what happens. And so you see a lot of news outlets who really want the clicks or really want the exposure because their advertising companies are paying tons of money for their banner ad to show up or for their little ad to show up. And so really understanding like behind how media even gets funded, right? Like without advertising dollars, media companies could not exist. And to kind of what Tia is saying, like really finding those reputable sites and remembering that like there's objective reporting and there's subjective reporting, and most of what we're consuming these days is subjective, which is kind of like the opinion of a person, versus objective, which is like, oh, this is the facts of what happened. And so really learning to kind of know how to go through that, and then just remembering that like most media companies that are producing any content, their goal is to generate clicks to their website so that they can continue to grow their base. And at the end of the day, the people that are spending money and investing in these companies tend to be their advertisers.
So it's like, what do you do, right? So what I do on Facebook, I always check the date. A lot of people post old news, and that's a problem. You can also report fake news and let the platform know that it's fake or it's wrong. And even when you find reputable sites, I always look at who the reporter is, because a reporter comes with their own bias. So even if it is reputable, I want to see previous work or reports that they've put out, because I can hear their voice more. Another thing that's really apparent in like our generation is cancel culture. We see one thing and we make an extreme decision of like, okay, this or that is canceled, no longer going to engage in anything that has to do with this person or this topic. And we do that because we do that so quickly without doing additional research. So we have to do better as a community and as a society of like checking the facts and making sure that we are making informed decisions. It's so easy to share memes. Memes are funny, but memes also have a lot of misinformation. People can so quickly create that. And especially if it's funny, it goes viral so quickly, and there's serious repercussions. It's very hard to contain that once it's gone viral and put everywhere. So that's kind of my own personal, like, when I'm doing research and see things on my feed on how I can navigate through fake news and news put out there to sway a decision of mine.
Yeah, so like notifying fake news is probably, for us, for people like us, it's pretty easy to get sucked into believing something that's not true, which is not really healthy for our world. But I also want to recognize the term echo chamber, because I never realized that so many social medias have that. Because, like, for example, if there's like Instagram, if you go to the search section, all the posts are the things that you're most commonly gonna like or what you want to see, I guess. And so for that, it's kind of feeding you more into what you believe, your likes, your opinions, and not necessarily looking what other people have to say. And so I think that for that, I just learned that because I never knew, and I just recognized that, which is just, oh my gosh. But thank you for that.
Mahalo for all of your answers. Our next question will be coming from Kina.
How can we, as the youth, have our voices be heard even though we're below the voting age? As a youth, how can we be more politically aware and when sometimes adults push you away from those conversations? If Juan could start us off, that would be great.
Tina, that's a really wonderful question, and I want to answer you the best I can and be short, because I know that I think everyone wants to share a little bit here. I think that as youth, even though you can't, legally vote, I think there are a lot of ways for you to serve on committees and councils and groups, whether it's at your school board, your city council, working and volunteering with a local nonprofit that you really care about, that also, can impact the way that adults work and think. Those are all ways to get engaged. And actually right now, I think we're seeing one of the most active young generations that we've seen in a very long time. People that are just changing the world, people that are changing the narrative, the principles of what we're talking about, and really approaching the issues with so much integrity. You have everything to lose and everything to gain. And the world that adults are working on right now, the world that we're supposed to be leaving to young people, I think it's absolutely important that young people are involved and to continue to find those ways to get involved. Because, when we look at the people that are in power right now, especially at the national level, I don't think they can save us. I think our young people are going to save us.
I'll add to that, but even though you can't vote, doesn't mean you can't help win elections. You can volunteer for campaigns and get, into that world. You can help make phone calls. You can help knock on doors. You can help, this is what they call like the grassroots. Is that everyone is trying to help their particular candidate work, and that's by walking, that's by having conversations, by talking, by protesting, all of those kinds of stuff that you don't have to be any certain age to help out with. There's no, if there's a local candidate, especially, even if you want to help, with the president election, you can sign up, you can text people. You guys are great at texting. People love talking to students more than they love talking to adults. So if you're calling for your local, like if you want to call for Nadia, for instance, who's running, those conversations are very important. And you as a student who is gung-ho about the election and stuff is a wonderful way of getting involved and making yourselves part of the part of the election without actually casting your vote.
And I would just add, like, just because you don't have a vote, you have a voice. So whether that is, you know, like Juan Carlos mentioned, like writing, being involved in a committee, like I, you know, I was a teacher and I loved teaching, and every couple of weeks I would come home from teaching, you know, high school students, and I always learned way more from my high school students than I did from adults in my life, than a lot of other people around me. And so there's like this saying, it's like the youth will inherit the revolution. And I truly believe that to be true. I think the youth have helped us change the conversation on where we are even today, even in this moment. And if you continue to use your voices, whether it's through social media, whether it's through phone banking, whether it's through protesting, whatever you are comfortable doing, I do believe that change will come and that we can make change happen. And so it's just continuing to write, continuing to speak, continuing to post. You all have voices. They are very important voices. And we all need to hear those voices so that we can make better decisions for our future.
I agree that the youth are already our leaders, and as adults we need to do better to make space for the youth at the tables that we sit at, to make sure that your voices are heard. I think it's important to find safe mentors who will help navigate that political atmosphere and that political world. And you shouldn't need to change how you talk or the language that you use for your story to be heard. People always say, like, people always tell me, like, oh, you're too young, you don't know, or, you know, they talk about, well, you're still in school, you're still learning. But politics affects our life, how we grow up, and there's no better person than the youth who are affected by those decision makings. Not only does it affect the parents, but the parents, you know, the climate that they're working in with their jobs or their taxes, that directly impacts the youth and the access that our youth have. So if ever you need help cultivating that story of self, organizations like Apano, or reaching out to the Parks and Rec, or reaching out to, you know, Nadia Hasan, who has that education teaching background. These are all safe adults that can help you navigate making your voice heard. So I just want to empower you to continue that.
Thank you for your advice about how we can help when we're still below the age of voting. And now I know how we can help. Thank you.
All right, mahalo for all of your answers. Our next question will be coming from Ku'ulei.
Thanks, Noi. I'd like to direct this question to Tia first. What are the advantages of voting at a younger age, and what can be some disadvantages?
I don't know if there is any real disadvantages to voting at a younger age. I think people will say that younger people don't have the life experience or the education to be able to vote or know how to vote, and I think that's wrong. I think everybody has different lived experiences, and the things that you guys, or that the younger generations are going through is definitely different life experience than the current older voters, but that doesn't make it less relevant. I think it makes it even more relevant because you are having all of these decisions affect you real time, and your goal is to try to change things for your current situation and for the future. So I don't really see any disadvantages. For advantages, I mean, the younger we go, the more diverse our population is. And so the more diverse of voices that we hear is when our country will be able to be representative of all. So the the younger we get people to vote, the better our leaders will be reflective of the community that they serve. I think voting the first time is probably the hardest because you have to learn how to register to vote. You have to learn where you're going to vote. You have to learn how to vote, what days to vote, what to look for, all of that kind of stuff. So I think if you do it young and get that one vote out of the way, then the rest is easy. You know exactly what you need to do. You know how to navigate it, and then you eventually have. It's not that hard to vote. And so, especially in Oregon when it's mail-in voting, right? So once that first vote is cast, then you can develop great voting habits. And I think that's the advantage of voting young also, is that you start having your voice put in earlier, and once you start voting, you're more active and aware of what's coming through, what information, and you're just more worldly or community focused. And so there's so many advantages to the younger generation voting. And I think once we get there, once we can encourage all of our young people to vote, I think we will be in a much better place as a country.
If you can drive when you're 16, I think you should be able to vote.
And you know, when you're younger and voting, it puts the pressure on schools to provide that civic education on voting and what that means and how government operates, instead of waiting to figure it out once you're 18. Not everyone chooses to go to college or chooses to even go into those classes that teach those things. And so as the youth are, you know, required to attend school from K to 12th grade, the more we can activate that civic engagement while still in school, I think we will be able to see a lot of our communities who rely on the public school education be able to stay civically engaged whenever, you know, post-graduation or whatever they decide to do. So I think that's really key, is we need to start educating a lot earlier as well.
Thank you so much. That was very informational. I will definitely keep that in mind. I'm soon going to be able to vote soon-ish. But yes, definitely, I'm interested in putting like pressure on our school systems because we don't learn about voting as much in school. And I think it's something important. And it'll definitely bring a lot more interest to younger voters if we learn about it in school. Yeah, thank you so much for that information.
For our last question, I'll be the one asking it. If it's all right, I would like to start with Auntie Mar. The question I have for you is, how can we as the future activists of our nation bring a change in voting and be the change that we need to see?
Oh, I love that question. I think that to be the change in voting, I want all the youth that are watching this is, do not change who you are. Show up as your authentic self with your culture, with your identities. There's so much information that we learn from our elders and our family. Something that I learned moving from Hawaii to Oregon is how to bring that aloha spirit with me wherever I go. However, when you move into society where it's very white or predominantly white culture, you lose a lot of that identity and core values that were instilled in you as a youth. And so as you're making those decisions, as you're cultivating your story, be you and show up as you 100%, and don't let anyone ever make you think that you are not enough. And you know, as we continue to make space for youth voices, the imagination of the youth is incredible. As we grow older, that imagination gets smaller and smaller into these boxes of structure that we think is the ceiling, and it's not. all of the ideas that you folks have are valid and can happen. We are in no position, adults are in no position to tell you that it is impossible. So I think with that, you know, finding a mentor, finding access to safe adults and community-based organizations who have those services available, who will provide that information and platform to the youth is really important. Someone who I look up to is Nicole Watson, and something she shared with us was, the youth are already the leaders, the adults are just there to fund it and to provide the platform. And I agree. So whatever you want to do, just keep pushing forward, and don't be afraid to call adults out if they're not making the space for you and if they're not hearing you. I think it's a great time to be able to do that. And it's also very intimidating. As a brown woman, I enter a lot of spaces that are predominantly white men and women. And it's hard to have those conversations, but it feels so good afterwards. So keep on doing that.
Mar, just really that was beautiful. And, you know, I think that even for us panelists, that spoke to me, you know, I think that when you're young, when you're a student, you know, when you're in college, when you're, you know, starting your career and you get your first job, when you're a few years into your career, into your job, I think all of those things are so true. And that really spoke to me, and it kind of made me feel a little emotional. You know, I really want to really emphasize the importance of values, and just keeping who you are. That is so important, and I think it's going to be even more important in the future in terms of what dominant culture and dominant society expects from us, because, you know, a lot of us are bilingual, bicultural. We have a grassroots experience. We have a different experience. And more, those perspectives and identities, experiences, lived experience is becoming more and more valuable, because you can't operate in the world without having that knowledge, or without, you know, working to attain that knowledge if you didn't grow up with it. Sometimes I think that growing up in Oregon, that's very white, it can be very challenging to you know, embrace your identity, be very proud of it. You know, I know that when I was growing up, I struggled with a lot of those things. You know, but at the end of the day, I think that's my advice. Just remember who you are, your values, your experience. And, you know, one day it's going to be so valuable. It is right now, but, you know, we're older, and, you know, it's going to really be a huge competitive advantage and asset for you.
I think the most important thing is to make sure you find your voice and use your voice. You need to use it. Knowing your values, knowing yourself, knowing everything, you need to be proactively loud about it, because all the leaders, you know, we always talk about, we're trying to create a better world for the future. You guys are our future. But to really be able to hold somebody accountable is that they need to know that something is wrong. They need to hear what needs to be changed. They need you to tell them what needs to be done. And if there's no voice, if there's no one telling them, they're just going to continue on along the way as they do. But if collectively the youth come out and are loud, and force that space, and there's electeds who give you that space and actively listen and empathize, if you, like Mar said, be a leader and cause that disruption and have leaders that reflect you, then, you know, we'll get the changes that we need to change, and we'll constantly be moving forward forever. So, but if you don't say anything, if you just say, my vote doesn't matter, my voice doesn't matter, what can I do? There's nothing I can do. Nothing is going to change. It's the people that complain. It's the people that show up. It's the people that do all the calls. Those are the ones that people have to be accountable to. So just make sure to find your voice and use your voice.
I would just echo what everyone says. I think one thing I want to share is really don't be afraid to lose who you are. I think when I grew up here, in the time that I grew up, similar to what Juan mentioned, was, I mean, I didn't want to be Indian, and I didn't want to be Pakistani, and I didn't want to be Muslim. I really just wanted to fit in. And that, I felt like sometimes I worry about pieces of me that I lost. And so I encourage you to not lose whatever identity or culture that you have. And, you know, to that question, you're already doing it. You're here, you're listening to leaders. But I also heard you share something about, I want to see civics education in schools. There's a House representative that you can contact to do that, right? So if you want to see another change, there's a school board member in a school district that you need to write to do that. And so I encourage you, after this, go do some research. Like, who are the people that you care about, or what are the issues that you are excited about? Maybe it's climate justice, maybe it's education, maybe it's criminal justice system. I recently was told it's not really criminal justice because it's not justice, right? So what are the systems that you are looking at today that you're like, these are not working for me, or these are not working for my parents, or these are not working for the people that I care about, and how can I understand these systems? So, you know, thank you all for being here. You're already doing it, but and then like start looking at like, what's the thing that you want to take down, and start taking it down. We're here, we're listening. I think all of us would want to connect with you after this if you wanted. So just know that we're here for you, and we really believe in what you all are hoping to do and change, and we want to be a part of that.
Thank you all so much for all of your input and all of your insight. And there was one thing that you all really said, and it just spoke out to me, and it was, be true to who we are, and we don't need to change to fit whatever box that society wants us to be put in. And the fact that we can have our own opinions and we can speak out about them, because it is a free society and we have freedom of speech, and we are very lucky to be able to have freedom of speech because of the country we live in, and it's one of the foundations of our nation. And I think it's just amazing that we have the ability to speak out about these things we have opinions on, and we don't have to be a certain age to talk about things, and we don't have to look a certain way. We can be who we are and give our opinions and talk about them to other people. So just thank you so much for all of you guys being here today. Before we close today, I would like to invite our students who helped put this together to introduce themselves and help encourage our communities to vote.
See you next week. Aloha, my name is Kina. I am 10 years old. I am a 5th grader in the Hillsborough School District, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Everyone should vote because my future depends on it.
Aloha, my name is Meima. I'm a freshman in the Beaverton School District. I am 14 years old. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and people need to vote. People need to vote so that our future activists would have the guidance in being able to live in a world of trust, community, and compromise.
Aloha, my name is Kahoku. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am 15 years old. I'm a sophomore in the Beaverton School District. And why you should vote is because your vote matters, but also we also matter. And yeah.
Hi, my name is Ku'ule. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am 16 and I am a junior in the Beaverton School District. It is important for you guys to vote to show diversity in the population and for leaders to reflect the community that they are making decisions for.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a 7th grader in the Beaverton School District, and everyone needs to vote because it's too good of an opportunity, you know, just to have your voice be heard. And yeah, I want to appreciate everybody who's here and who's given us guidance.
Aloha, my name is Haley. I'm a sophomore in the Beaverton School District. I'm 15 years old and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. You should vote because your vote shapes our future.
Okay. Aloha, my name is Noelani, and I am a freshman in the Beaverton School District. The reason everyone needs to vote is because, like Sophia said earlier, it's such a good opportunity and it's way too good to give up. And it happens once every 4 years. So the fact that it happens, it's not like it happens once a year. We have to wait every so many years in order for it to happen. And although we are the youth, it's amazing to know that we have the ability to reach out to public figures, and we can have our voices be heard even though we're under the voting age. But it's definitely more helpful if you vote because you have the ability to vote and everyone has their own individual opinions. So it's just amazing if people can speak out on all of them.
My name is Chloe. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm 14 and am a freshman in the Beaverton School District. And you should vote because when you vote, you represent the needs of your community and in turn represent all the youth. And when you cast your vote, you represent all the youth who cannot cast their own.
Mahalo nui loa to our amazing panelists and all the youth that joined us today. We hope that today's talk story session has helped you understand and answer many of the questions you also had. Like we said before, we hope to use this platform as a safe space for all youth to come together and talk about the issues that we, a key component of today's society, are faced with as we move into the future. No subject is off limits. We hope to continue these sessions monthly, and we need you, our peers, friends, and family. For more information or ways to be involved, please email kaelele@kalohcc.org or visit www.kalohcc.org. Before we leave today, we want to remind you that Oregon's registration deadline is October 13th, and Election Day is November 3rd. Please don't forget to vote. My name is Noelani, and on behalf of Kamaliʻi Talk Story, we are counting on you. Mahalo for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Woo!